Again, hello and welcome to everyone. I'm looking forward to having this time together with you. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lynn Freest, and today I'll share with you the 4 actions that you can take to jumpstart your Encore career. And a recorded version of this webinar will be available, and we'll also provide the presentation deck. We'd love to hear from you, so please post questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them all, mainly at the end of the session. Now we'll get started with our topic. And again, many of the people here today I know, and again, thank you for attending, and I look forward to sharing this with you. But we'll get started here. So who's this webinar for? For me, it's going to be you're considering leaving a corporate career, and there could be other circumstances, and you may be either voluntarily or involuntarily leaving that corporate career, but that's what we're seeing. And in addition to just leaving, you may want to start an Encore career. What's the next step for you? Another idea that I'll be helping you with is you may want to become a company of one. So having left a corporate career, you may not want to get involved in another big organization. You want to see what you can do all by yourself. And then finally, you want to leave a legacy for others. Many of us, as we get to this stage in our lives, are saying, okay, how can I pass on what I know and really help others learn what they need to be successful? Now, why is this needed? Whether or not, you may want to do this, but why is this truly needed for you? There are 3 key shifts happening in the world. The first is a demographic shift. There's over 28 million boomers that are retired already, and we're adding about 2 million a year. Now, that's not a problem, it's fine, but McKinsey Company has said, we need to have enough people participating in the economy to sustain our overall standard of life. So we need more talent, and we'll get more talent from younger folks, but we also could say, hey, let's engage the talent we already have here, rather than leaving them sitting on the sidelines. The next shift is a longevity shift. As one author, Linda Grattan, has written a book titled The 100-Year Life. It used to be people retired and left the workforce in their 60s, and there was only a few years in front of them. But in today's world, it could easily be 30 years in front of them. So you need to ask yourself, what are you going to do to both keep yourself interested and engaged, and also to finance that extended period of possibly 30 years after leaving a corporate career? Now, the third thing is the technology shift. And this is sort of a two-edged sword for those of us who are digital immigrants. People often think technology will take our jobs, but most people say they're just going to change our jobs. Now, as boomers, we do have to be intentional about learning new pieces of technology. But the flip side of that is this new technology makes it more possible than ever to actually start a business on your own. You don't have to have all the skills or hire all the skills. Technology will take care of some of the skills for you. So technology is both our challenge and our friend as we consider an Encore career or becoming a silver entrepreneur. So myself, I had a long and rich career. I was mainly in administrative type roles, I'll say. Figuratively speaking, I was one of the people in the corporate world who made the trains run on time and made things efficient. That was, in broad sense, what I did. And my official roles were more in the area of execution and having people follow processes. But as I advanced, later in my career, I wanted to move into a learning and development role. So my epiphany, around 2008, I applied for a position as a manager in learning and development. I felt very well qualified, and I'd prepared a great resume and was sure I could bring real value to the role. When I didn't get an interview, I wanted to know why. Well, I talked to Stan, a leader in learning development that I knew and respected. He'd always been thoughtful and helpful. He acknowledged my experience and skills, but said there was a lot of competition for the position. And then he said, Lynn, this is considered a developmental position. Well, I was crushed. Why would I not be considered? Why couldn't I fit into a 3-year role, which is, as they talked about developmental roles, they were often about 3 years in length. Why couldn't that be me helping develop other people? Then the next thing, why does having a shorter timeline in my career limit me in the roles that I play? And I came to that, there was a book by Reid Hoffman, who was one of the founders of LinkedIn. He called it The Alliance. But one of the key topics he said in there that we should really consider all work in terms of tours of duty, was his term he used. So it's, 2 to 3 years. We won't have people necessarily in the same spot or the same chair for 10 years or anything like that. So we should consider, no matter what the age of the person is, that they're on a tour of duty. And so, that was my thinking about that. So my Encore journey began. And you can see from the road here, it has many twists and turns. It's certainly not a straight uphill climb, but I still wanted to grow in my career. I wasn't ready to truly just retire. So I began looking for opportunities that might exist outside the company. Well, I loved working for the company, but I still wanted to grow my career and in a different path. I wanted to create my ideal role and thrive in that ideal role. So one of the ways is start my own company. So I'm Lynn, and I'm what I call a silver entrepreneur. I went from the slide rule and paper engineering documents to simulations and video documentation. I'm an industrial engineer, both by education and by my natural inclination. And by that, I mean, I'm fascinated by how people and technology come together to create value for others. Now, there's lessons that I've learned. And probably one of the big ones, and we'll talk about this more later in the presentation, is having an entrepreneurial mindset and a corporate mindset are very different things. There's just how will you and I focus on development. We are experts, but we have to focus on development also. The next big lesson I learned was I'd really defined myself and my value in a traditional way. In other words, in terms of the positions that I had or the assignments, past work positions, a resume, as it were, in the traditional sense. And quite frankly, the titles I had reflected these administrative experiences, such as production engineering or labor relations, and it didn't reflect developmental experiences. Even though in many of my positions, I was actually helping people develop, implementing change, and helping the organization grow. I was often in developmental roles, but that wasn't what, quote, the positions said for me. So the purpose of today's webinar, there are going to be 4 steps that will help you jumpstart you on your path to an Encore career. And we'll go through each of the steps in some level of detail. The first step is developing your mindset as an entrepreneur. I thought I could skip over this, and I thought, well, that's going to be straightforward. I'm a senior person, I'm experienced. But then I started working with real entrepreneurs and realized how much I had to learn. So as well as, quite frankly, and we'll talk about this later, how my corporate mindset held me back from really be successful in this new Encore career. The second piece is you need to define your expertise and create your value statement. And I talked about that a moment ago. You really have to say, how am I going to help people? And it has to be phrased in ways that people understand how you're going to help them. You can't say, I'm going to help you because I was a manager of logistics. That just doesn't fly. And we'll talk more about how do you go about doing that, because you're going to be out there creating a new product, and it's the product of you. The third step is exploring your Encore career toolbox. Now, a lot of it's obviously is around technology, but there's some other areas that I think we really need to pay attention to also. And then the fourth step, again, this is something I think I overlooked, and I think a lot of people might overlook, is you need to develop your practice plan. So whether it be me learning how to do a webinar or somebody learning how to set up a blog or a podcast, you have to have a plan and really look at how you're going to do this stuff. So here's sort of a summary of my blueprint. Develop your mindset as an entrepreneur, define your expertise and create the value statement, explore your unclear career toolbox, and then decide how you will create your practice plan to implement all these things. And I'll have a special offer at the end. So let's begin your journey. Just for some things that, to keep in mind, you can continue to develop and share your best contribution. You're not limited by what may have made or may not have happened in your corporate career. This is all possible. People have been doing this for thousands of years, working outside the corporation. In today's world, there are many entrepreneurs out there whose skills are no greater than yours. So this is all possible. And as I mentioned earlier, technology really can be a big help. I'll be sharing the lessons that I learned, because with those, I think you can go farther and faster than I did. And that's what my goal is, to help you do that. So let's begin your journey. And here's a quote from Steve Jobs when he did a commencement address. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. And I've taken that to heart. I keep following, where's my heart at? Where is my intuition telling me to go next? And now we'll get down to what I call the biscuits and gravy, the details of it. I love basic things like biscuits and gravy. They're simple, tasty, at least for me, but it's the very simple things, and yet the things that have to happen each and every day. So the first things, developing your mindset. You are an expert, but you still need to have a growth mindset. You need to be thinking about what might be possible. Another way to say that on the growth mindset is, I don't know how yet. In other words, it's not that I can't, I don't know how yet to do that. So keep that in mind, whether it be explaining your expertise, whether it be starting a podcast. That whole idea is, I don't know how yet to do this, but I'll find out. You need to be both a master and a learner, the expert and the apprentice. Again, you have a wealth of knowledge that you are seeking to share, but obviously you may not know how to create a podcast. You may not know how to describe your expertise. So you're going to be both in both those roles, own your expertise, but also be a learner, learning from others and applying that work to you. I think of too, in my corporate life, we never took action until, in the Six Sigma world, we were 99% sure we were right. Well, that's going to be one of those things. As you're a learner or an entrepreneur, you're going to have to be willing to go ahead with 65% being right. So again, that gets back to this. Your mindset has to be different as an entrepreneur. Another thing, there's a gentleman by the name of Gay Hendricks who wrote a book called The Big Leap. His concept in there is, what's your upper limit? And this, another quote from Henry Ford was, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. In other words, you have to say, what is your upper limit? And it could be, from my perspective, could I make multiple six figures as a consultant? I think I can, but could I make seven figures? That's probably outside of my perspective at this present time. So, but wherever you're at on that, what's your upper limit? And there's a picture of Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap. Then in step 2, we're going to talk about defining your expertise. Beyond your job titles, what have people asked you about? That's, I thought another way to get at this. It's not that you were just a manager in logistics, I'll say, is continuing that example, but there were questions that people asked you about. They came to you because You were the one that had the skills, the knowledge, the experience that could answer the complex questions. So think about what people were asking you about. Another thing that again defines you as a senior expert is you've handled the exceptions. New people can follow the process, follow the recipe, but all of a sudden you've had those years of experience. So you've gone through the recession period, you've gone through, the tornado that hit, or you've gone through any number of things where the business has done, been faced with something outside the realm of their understanding. And then you've worked with people a lot. Again, this is a skill that people develop over time. You may need to continue developing it, as I do and we all do, but you've worked with people a lot. And then as you get farther into defining your expertise, you need to create your ideal customer. Who would the person you really like to work with? I mean, you could say, well, I'm starting this new business. I can work with anybody. Well, that may be true, but really you want to be able to work with people where you and they are really going to be on the same page. So, and again, it could be different. You may say, you know what, I want to only work with large corporations because that's what I'm used to. Or you may say, I really like to work with medium-sized companies because they're more nimble and they're easy, they'll change quicker. Or you may like to work with startups, saying, I really like to help people get off the ground and really find their way with a new product or service. So you want to create your ideal customer. And in this entrepreneurial business, it really turns into what they call what your avatar is. So it's you go into some level of detail as who would I really like to work with? I had a good friend, Jennifer, that told me early on as I was starting my journey and I was trying to explain what I did and everything. And she said, Lynn, it gets real simple. She says, what can I pay you for? It has to be on your website. You have to be able to tell me quickly what it is I can pay you for. It can't be, I help people strive or whatever. No, what can I pay you for? So it became as simple as that. Now, another gentleman, Donald Miller, who's a marketing expert, and I learned a lot from him as to how you present things and what goes on your website. And his basic thing was, if you confuse, you lose. So if you have a long rambling thing on your website, again, people don't know what they can buy from you. They'll just move on to something else because you just have to be really clear, concise in your own mind as in how you'd explain it to others. Now, here's another example. John Nemo, he's done some interesting stuff on LinkedIn, but he has a special framework he uses for your LinkedIn profile. Now, normally, many of us would have thought that the LinkedIn profile was all about like a traditional resume, a list of my positions and all those kinds of things. Well, he says, no, there's these 5 questions you should actually explicitly answer on your About Me section of the LinkedIn profile. What I do, not my titles, but what I do, why it works, what makes me different, and then, yes, some areas of expertise, but talking about problems you've solved as opposed to positions you've had. And then finally, client experiences. And again, even in the corporate world, you had people you worked with. They weren't technically clients, but you had people who had experiences and they were, they got value from their interactions with you. So now we move on to step 3, building your Encore career toolbox. And I will talk about the tech tools, but for me, it's also people skills as well as technology skills, then some business skills and some marketing skills. Here are things that you may have some experience on in your corporate career, but many of you, I bet you don't. Another thing to remember here, and this goes back to Gay Hendricks' The Big Leap book, he says, you really need to think about staying in your zone of genius. And by that, he means, and we'll talk about this because there's things that you need to do, but then there's just people you need to know who know how to do things because your zone of genius may not be in hard coding websites or doing the voice production for a podcast. That's what I found to be true. for myself. So you want to try to stay in your zone of genius. So in terms of people skills, this gets to the point, again, in a corporate world, there was a lot of structure, and you probably built up a lot of people skills, whether you were intentional about them or not. But going forward now, as you try to present yourself to people who you're not familiar with, you do have to create a message. A message has to be understandable and concise, I'll say. You have to figure out how to connect, where to connect with people. How are you going to get them? Will I reach out and find people on LinkedIn? Will I go to trade shows? How are you going to connect with them? And then again, you're going to have to learn to listen. And I'll say, this is where, being an expert, sometimes you're not as good at listening. But as you go to try to sell your services to someone else, you really have to be able to listen for what they need and then craft your solution to what they really need. Not just sell solutions, but sell something that they truly need. And then, yes, we do have the technology skills. And you're going to have to choose, I'll say, what you have as a home base, maybe a website, maybe a podcast. It may be starting off just your LinkedIn profile, someplace where you can really share your information and how to contact you, things like that. You'll have to decide how you use social media or any of the other media tools to reach out to people. Again, in a more traditional sense, it may be, what trade shows will you attend? What conferences will you attend? How are you going to reach people that might be your customers? And then, yes, you'll have to select tech tools, whether it be for a blog, a podcast, a video, emails, campaigns, anything. You'll have to do some tech tools. A good friend of mine, Mike Kim, who does great marketing, and he also has a book coming out on branding and the brand called You. But he says, success is sequential. It's not simultaneous. So you'll also have to decide which of these things you do first. I had another friend that once said, what's the fastest path to the cash? And it could be like coaching or something, reaching out to people you know, saying, hey, I can coach people that are just coming up in this world in my area of expertise. Do you know anybody that could use that? It can be as simple as that when you get started. Then you might choose to say, I'm going to start a podcast or I'm going to start a blog. But you just go step by step. Don't try to do it all at once. It can be overwhelming. Then the third element of this Encore Career Toolbox is business skills. Again, and what I found is I didn't know much about the consulting business, the basics. How do I craft an offer? How do I send out an invoice? Then the things that you would normally expect, whether you form an LLC, do you have liability assurance? And then accounting and taxes. Again, you may, in your past, the corporate life, you actually didn't worry about these things very much. But now as a company of one, you have to, pay attention to these things and in most cases, have somebody do them for you. And then finally, it's marketing skills. And I go back to that earlier, finding out where your customers are. They may not be on Facebook or Instagram or wherever it may be. Your customers may not be corporate CEOs. They may be somebody who's at a lower level in the organization. But you have to be conscious about finding where they are. Then you have to uncover their pain points. What is it they really need solved? And finally, to get more intense about it, discover how you can help them solve their bleeding neck wound. What's the thing that's keeping them up at night? It's causing a lot of pain and anguish in their work or their business. You got to decide what's the first problem that you can help them solve. Because in the end, it really gets to be back to where the customers have to know you, they have to be able to like you and trust you. So then they'll think about buying from you. And again, referring back to Mike Kim, another thing he says is, this marketing is really about opening a relationship. It's not really about just closing a sale. So you're opening a relationship with people as you talk to them. And later on, hopefully you'll actually sell yourself and it won't be a problem. The fourth step is your practice plan. Well, one of the things is you've got kind of this blueprint that I've roughed out here for you. That's a place to start. Then decide what's the best next step. And it could be any number of things. What is the very first thing? My value statement. Maybe that's the first thing you want to work on. Then you actually have to schedule your work. Once again, once you leave the corporate world with the things that are very structured, you're at home, you can do anything you want, but you have to decide what you're going to do. So you really have to actually sit down and schedule it. Now, as in working with me and some authors that I've found very helpful in this arena is one was James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. So it's, how do you actually create new routines and new habits of work that reflect what you want to do as an entrepreneur? Another gentleman, Cal Newport, wrote the book Deep Work. And here he comes back to, says, there's all kinds of things that can take up our days, but how do we carve out time to do the really deep work? So if I'm trying to create a new service, or I'm trying to create a new body of knowledge around something, how do I carve out those large blocks of time to actually focus on that? And then the final book, a gentleman by the name of Josh Kaufman had a book called The First 20 Hours. And what he did in this book was he just picked a variety of things and said, how much can I learn about this subject in 20 hours of work? So whether it was a game called Go, or whether it was learning to surfboard, or whether it was learning to play chess. He said, what can I do and how could I go? So again, just illustrative of this is how you might construct a practice plan. In some of these things like setting up a website, you won't need to or wish to know everything about that, but you'll want to know some elements of it. So what are the elements you need to know to move forward? So again, there's my blueprint. Develop your mindset, define your expertise, explore your Encore career toolbox, and decide how you'll create your practice plan. So just to give you some examples of the bold actions I took to move ahead in my career. First, I did choose to retire. And then I went to several conferences for entrepreneurs. And, and these were things outside of my experience. Normally I would have been at engineering conferences or different things like that. But this was specifically for people who were starting businesses, and a wide variety of businesses, by the way. And one of the conferences was called, from this picture, was Permission to Prosper. And it was about people sharing their vision of what was possible as far as doing independent work. So again, something outside of my normal wheelhouse, but it was very valuable and beneficial. The next thing, I joined what you call a peer group or a mastermind group. And this is where I got together with other people who were building businesses similar to mine. And we had a leader of that group, and he was guiding us along. Actually, he's pictured in this photo here. But during that time, working with others, each of us trying to build our business, I was challenged to look at what was holding me back. And then things like, what would clear a big roadblock for me? What are the things that I could, I'll say, take a risk on or make an investment in to really move things ahead? So one of them was I hired a virtual assistant. And that virtual assistant, she helps me with the writing I need to do, crafting my message, creating marketing information, all those things that I could get good at, but I'm not as good at. She's already better at them than I am. So she's just marvelous. And I give her kudos because she's helping with our webinar today. So thank you, Maggie. The next thing is I decided to go ahead and create a podcast called Leading the Factory Forward. And that helped me really start sharing my thoughts and information out there in the world. And I'll say I really felt like I'd turned pro when I committed to creating a weekly podcast. Now, doing that, I decided I can't actually do all these things that make for a really great podcast myself. And so I actually hired somebody to do the production. I just record the information, and then they're able to produce it and load it up, and they make me sound amazing. A gentleman by the name of Donnie Osmond has a wonderful team that helps produce the podcast. But again, I'd almost refer back to the Gail Hendricks book on stick in your zone of genius. My genius wasn't in making the sound quality of a podcast be better. So I had somebody else is going to help me with that. So what does my world look like now? It is an ongoing journey. I'm not perfect. I'm not ready to be a millionaire or anything like that, but I continue to make a contribution, coaching people, consulting with small companies. My podcast, I believe, provides value. People have given me feedback that they appreciate what they hear in my podcast. I'm also in some other areas of coaching connected to a worldwide group of people that I can collaborate with. And again, today's world, some of this has actually been amazing to me. I worked in a company, was basically in one location, and now all of a sudden, in fact, just this morning, I was collaborating with a worldwide group of people on some coaching programs. So these things are just, it's more possible than ever before for these things to, you to do these things. And then finally, obviously have the freedom of choice. And so the picture itself is of the Grand Tetons out in Wyoming, the Jackson Hole area. I have the freedom to go travel, freedom to go see these things. As a company of one, I can decide when to work, where to work, those kinds of things. So what can your world look like? Do spend some time thinking about what you might want, not necessarily what you think is possible right now, but what you might want. So let's create your new story, because you can create your own path forward. You don't want to follow my path. You need your own solution. You can go further and faster, but because of what I've learned on my journey. You can move from that old world of corporate and into your Encore career. You can develop your wisdom and knowledge into something people are going to seek you out for. You may choose to do just volunteer and pursue your work that way and sharing your knowledge. You may choose to totally retire. All these things are fine. It's just I've given you another option that might be something you're interested in. You get to choose what you do, and you get to choose the pace at which you proceed. You may take 2 months off every year for a vacation and only pursue your business on 8 months out of the year. So you have a choice. And imagine this, being independent, choosing what to work on, sharing your talents, but living in the lifestyle that you want, work when you want and where you want at the pace you want. You can create a virtual team and yet remain a company of one. And you can build a legacy by helping new talent to develop. So some things to consider. It might be called the do's or don'ts. I've just got a few do's here for you. Have a plan and maintain your focus. I mentioned that in step 4. You need to have some structure on what you're going to do. And you have to, in all the distractions in life, especially in the freedom of retirement, you have to have a way to maintain your focus. Embrace failure. That's been difficult for me. Again, I come from the manufacturing world of Six Sigma, where 99% of the time you don't make a mistake. Well, in the entrepreneurial world, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I had to, been upset by them and dwelled on them too long. It's just a matter, can I embrace the failure, pivot, and move on to the next thing? Get help with your challenges. As I mentioned, I hired Maggie to help me with certain aspects of my business. I hired Danny Osmond on the podcasting to help me get help. I also had the masterminds that I've been in, several different ones. I'm in one now. That helps me as I'm working with other people, because collectively we can be a lot smarter than we can be all by ourselves. So get help, work with peers, work with experts, see what you can do as a group while you're still working as an individual business. And then a good friend of mine that I have currently, Jody, has said, Lynn, you have to be comfortable practicing in public. So I have to be, just today, this is my first webinar. I have to be comfortable out there sharing things, even though it's not something I've done many, many times before. So I'll jump back into my blueprint. Develop your mindset, define your expertise, create your toolbox, and decide on your practice plan. The first step I would just suggest to you, and this is an exercise that a good friend, Paul Axtell, created and shares with a lot of people, but 25 things I want. So just get out a sheet of paper and list 25 things you want in life. It's not the things that are important or what's possible. It's just what you want. But then see what kind of insights that generates for you. And it's not a one-time exercise. I think Paul says that he pulls it out every quarter or so. And it should include, should it come out that an Encore career is something that bubbles up in the 25 things I want, that's great. But if other things bubble up that you really want to focus on, that's great also. So I think it's still a great first step, just to get out of your head the things that you're dreaming or yearning about, or maybe have set aside that you now want to take a chance on it and work on. So the opportunity I will offer to you after this review of the things that I think are useful to you, there are two programs that I could help you move forward with. The first is a 4-session group accelerator. It'd probably be 4 weekly meetings. It'd be a small group. We do it by Zoom, and we'd help you create a more detailed roadmap and your personal plan to build an Encore career. Again, all the elements that are here, we'd try to cover in there. And a lot of it, we would also, that first step, working on your mindset. I think maybe that's, again, I overlooked that or tried to go by it. We would spend a fair amount of time doing that. And again, it would clarify over those 4 sessions, clarify what are the next steps that you need to do. Then if anybody wants to go farther on and move more into the implementation phase, then I'll offer a 3-month group coaching program. And again, we'd meet twice a month. We'd be collaborating with a group of 10 to 12 people. Each person would have a chance to share, I guess what I'll call it in a hot seat. They would share their activities and what they're up to, and then others could give them assistance or support or just, encouragement, whatever it may be. And then finally, it's this whole idea of this would give you the time and support to really start implementing your company of one. And again, as a special offer for this thing, if you wanted to do both those programs, I can do it this time for a one-time payment of $1,400. The normal price for these 2 programs would be a total of $2,000. And these offers are good for the first 30 people who wish to apply for them. So now's the time for you to begin your journey. Can you imagine? You have the freedom to continue sharing your talents, but living the lifestyle you want. You can have the ability to work when you want, where you want, and at the pace you want. And you can create a virtual team and yet remain a company of one. So your opportunity, here's sort of a summary of the opportunities moving forward. Now understand, if what I've given you here today is all you need, great. I encourage you to move ahead and take it on, because this is not, rocket science. What I've shared with you here today is simply a structure, a framework. This may be all you need, and that's great. If you want some more assistance, I'm happy to help you do that. And we'll be putting in the chat the actual locations where you could go to purchase these options if you choose to have them. But now I'll say, what are your takeaways? Could you share in the chat some of the things about the Q&A session? What are the things that you recognized or saw, or what are the things that came up in this particular session? One of the questions I had is, how long does it take? People can do this in a few months, or, I've been kind of getting better and better as I went along over 4 or 5 years. So a lot of it is just, 1, how bold you are, and 2, how much you can really, time you can spend for it. Another question I've had is, how do I find these people? These, people Maggie works through a group that has virtual assistants. And there are a variety of ways to do this. There's also services like Upwork, where you can actually get specific things. Another one, 99 Designs, gives a lot of help with creating graphics if you need a logo or a website, those kinds of things. So those are some of the things that I can share, and we can put together in some resource guides, because that's the beauty of today's world. So there are all kinds of ways to do these things that were much more difficult in the past, I'll say. Charles mentioned a good reminder is to embrace failure. And that's, again, we have to make small mistakes and quickly, and then move on. Another, Russ has talked about the LinkedIn riches, that whole idea of rethinking rethinking the resume. Where are you adding value, and how do you get there? It's one of those things that's really helped me a lot think differently about what I am and what value I have to share. So thank you, Russ. Another thing when I've worked in my peer groups or the masterminds is, we get overwhelmed by, like I said, all the things you could do. And I know Mike Kim, that helped me a lot and still helps me. He said he had one big project a year, and actually he'd divide his year into a third, not a fourths, and he'd have a major project. But he actually said the first year was creating his blog. The second year was creating the coaching groups. The third year was creating his podcast. The fourth year was some live events he did to help people. And then the fifth year, and the year we're on now, is he has written a book. So some of these things you kind of think of, what do I do? What resonates with me at this point in my life? We often say, well, everybody should write a book. Well, that's great. But for me, it was much easier to say, the easiest of those things for me was to say, you know what, I'm comfortable talking, I'm going to do a podcast. And I'll say, as I look at now the material I've created through my podcast, I probably have enough material that I can get a pretty good start on a book. But it's also the other thing, in sharing things with other people, it's helped me refine my thinking. So now I'm thinking differently about the Encore career, the silver entrepreneur, than I was 8 months ago, because I've been sharing the information and others have been helping me refine it. So with that, if there are no more questions, I guess I want to honor your time and attention. I appreciate that. As I said earlier, we will have a link to a replay for this webinar, and we will provide you with the slides so that you can use those also. So, and we'll give you some follow-up emails that'll give you the information on where to find these things. And with that, I guess I want to thank everybody today. Have a great day and have a great week.